All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to your own book show on this, I don't know what day it is. It's Monday. Monday. Yep, Monday. Monday, August 2nd. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Let's see, let me just get my screen all set up here. Get the stuff out of the way. I don't want that. Yeah, I'll keep that. We'll put that over there. Open this. All right, so I'm here in Israel, and I know I haven't been doing a lot of shows. The hotel I was staying at had lousy internet. Did one show from the Invent Center Israel offices, or actually from a boardroom at WeWorks that I rented in order to use for this. But other than that, I hadn't had a chance really spending time with my parents, whom I haven't seen in a long time. So it was a good opportunity, and took a little break. The hotel I'm in right now has great Wi-Fi. Actually, has wired internet, so it has great wired internet. So yeah, here we are. Thanks for joining me tonight. I know the hours are kind of weird, but here it's 10:30 at night. And I didn't want to go later than this. I need to get some sleep. Got a busy day tomorrow. We're doing a live event here in Israel. This has also become my opportunities to bitch and complain about the different COVID regulations, restrictions, travel bans, all this crap, and it's only getting worse. Nothing's getting better. Every time I have to travel anywhere, everything I have to do everywhere, there are a million forms, different regulations. The regulations change constantly, so staying on top of what they are, just a nightmare. The whole situation with COVID, traveling internationally. I thought vaccinations would open everything up, but it really hasn't. I guess it has under some conditions, but those conditions change, and the arbitrary whim of politicians, changes frequently. So it's been a nightmare. I think I told you about entering Israel and what that required. Now my plan is to go to London, and going to London every day it changes. But as of today, supposedly, the UK will recognize the American vaccine card, so they'll let you in with a vaccine. Now, of course, you have to do a PCR test before you fly to London. You have to do a PCR test 2 days after you arrive in London, which is okay because then you have to do a PCR test before you get to the United States. So given I'm only going to be in 3 days in London, my PCR test there will serve both purposes. I'll be able to use it for the London PCR requirement and for the US PCR requirement. So there's no end to it. And then, of course, there are forms I have to fill out to get into Puerto Rico. And it's like, God, I spent so many hours filling out forms, and it's not over yet, because before I leave Israel, the little fascist government of Israel has to give me permission to leave, because I have an Israeli passport. So they have to give me permission to leave the country, and have to give me a thumbs up in terms of where I go. So I have to fill out another form less than 24 hours before I leave. And I think I have to request special permission from the Israeli government to enter the United Kingdom, because the Israeli government has said that it's illegal for Israeli citizens to enter the UK. It's insane. It's insane. And everybody puts up with it. I put up with it. You fill out another form and another form, and you get a test, and you pay for this test, and you sign up for this test. I actually got the people to come to give me a PCR test in my hotel room tomorrow morning, so that'll be at least convenient. I won't have to look for parking. But that meant I filled out 3 different forms today in order to facilitate that happening. I'm just exhausted from the bureaucracy, the endless bureaucracy that is created from these things. And this is what the West has become: one big, lengthy, bureaucratic nightmare, all driven into a frenzy by COVID, a real disease. I'm no COVID denier, but give me a break. This is just overreach by government. It is just it's a complete denial of our rights. It's complete panic in the face of a pandemic that, for the most part, we have under control. Hospitals are no longer overflowing, except in places where you don't have high vaccination rates. But if people don't want to get vaccinated, then they should, be left free to suffer the consequences. I've been talking about the incompetent COVID measures from day one. You go back to my shows in March of last year. I've been talking about the ridiculous and immoral lockdowns. I've been talking about the just absurdity of the way this is being handled from day one. The idea that we're going to flatten the curve for the hospitals, but then we're going to flatten the curve so that nobody ever gets sick again. I've been talking about this for the last year and a half, about the insanity of all this panicked, irrational response. Again, not to say that COVID isn't a deadly disease for some people, not to say that COVID isn't a real situation that had to be dealt with, but I was an advocate from day one for dealing with it the way you're supposed to deal with pandemics. You test, you isolate, you trace. And if you can't do that, then just leave people alone. Anyway, for those of you in Israel, I will be doing an event tomorrow. You can check it out. It'll be both live, but there'll be a small audience live. Again, various COVID restrictions, but also, mainly COVID restrictions. But you'll be able to watch it by Zoom. My book, Free Market Revolution, is coming out in Hebrew. So that'll be launching the Hebrew edition of Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. I'll be signing books, so there'll be a few books for sale, and I'll be signing it for you if you come live. You can check all this out on the Ayn Rand Center Israel website. You can contact Boaz Arad, and you can come on over. On Saturday, I'll be part of a panel talking about tribalism in London, and again, you can check that out on the Ayn Rand Center UK website or meetup group, and you can join us there. That, I think, is open to the public, and the more the merrier. So please join us for that event. So hopefully you guys can join us for both of those events. It's been a long time since I've been in both Israel and the UK, so it'll be great to see some of you guys that I haven't seen in a long time. Some of you have discovered the show recently, and maybe haven't met before. So this is an opportunity for us to meet. Somebody says, "Is this panic or is it a deliberate power grab?" It's tempting to think it's a deliberate power grab. And I think many people accuse the Democrats in the United States of this being a power grab, but this is global. This is a global phenomena, the panic. In the UK, it's the Conservative Party that is completely insane. In Israel, it was the Conservative Party. It was Netanyahu's Conservative Party that completely panicked and shut down the entire country 3 different times and has created this massive bureaucracy. If you look at Europe, it doesn't matter if it's a leftist or a right-wing party. Now, yes, don't let a crisis go to waste. So all these political parties are basically using this to leverage to get more power. But this is also panic. This is panic in Republican and Democrats. It was panic for Trump. It was panic for de Blasio and every Democratic and most Republican governors. This was dealt with in a panicky, unthoughtful, Chinese way. It's as if, and I've said this many times on the show, it's like the West is mimicking China instead of China mimicking the West. It used to be that we thought that China would learn from us. Instead, we are learning from China. So we saw the Chinese lock their population down, so now we're locking everybody else down. Does the Israeli government accept American doctors' notes? I don't know what that means. My doctor wrote me a note for a Teddy Torah as a comfort support object. I have no idea what you're talking about, Hero. Sorry. I doubt that anybody accepts. I don't know what a titty Torah is or all of that. We are all Chinese now. Absolutely, Nicholas. I've been saying that for about a year now, or over a year now. Instead, we have become authoritarian like the Chinese. As the Chinese become more authoritarian, we are following in their track rather than the other way around. It truly is. It truly is stunning, the capitulation of Western idealism, the capitulation of Western liberty and freedom, the capitulation of Western governments to various forms and various degrees of authoritarianism. All right, let me just remind everybody that I do take super chat on this channel. We have typically, Alejandrina is not here today, partially because the timing's weird and partially because I probably didn't let her know in it with enough time. But Alejandrina usually helps me raise money, but through the super chat. But the super chat is a way for you to support the Iran Book Show. If you value what I do, show me that value for value, trade with me. And the way to trade with me is either to support the show here on the super chat. We usually raise about $400. Since I haven't been doing many shows recently, you saved up money. You should be able to afford to be generous today. So it would be nice to see some good contributions. I will be back in Puerto Rico next week. We'll get more on a regular basis, and we'll have the usual kind of technology there. Although then there's the OCON, the Objectives Conference, that I'll be going for a week again at the end of August, early September, and then in the fall. My plan is to travel, although I'm having second thoughts about travel given the difficulties that I'm encountering moving from country to country. The paperwork is killing me. So yes, use the super chat. The other way to support me, and my preferred way, if you will, is through monthly contributions. Again, if you value the show, if you see value in what I do, then one way to trade with me is to become a monthly subscriber. You can do it on iranbookshow.com/support. You can do it on Patreon or Subscribestar on locals and different levels of support. You get different benefits, and we have anything from, we have somebody supporting us at $2,000 a month all the way down to $2 a month. So a level of support appropriate to the value you get and a level of support appropriate to what you can afford. But that is the best way to support me on a monthly basis, because then it's predictable and I know it's there. All right, done with that. So I will be in the UK later this week. I will be on the new TV channel, I guess. There's a new TV channel called BG, something like that. And on Friday night, I expect to be on their main news show. Not sure exactly what we're talking about, but I'm sure they'll have something interesting. Stefan Porter says, we all need to get you on real time to educate Bill Maher. Have to get the word out of the importance of liberty. I agree. I've tried to get on GB News. I'll be on GB News on Friday night. Yes, Jennifer, I'm going to be on. And that'll be on Friday night. So, yes, I agree. I should be on real time. I should be on Bill Maher's show. I've tried in the past to get on Bill Maher's show. No success. Maybe you guys can put a little pressure and try to get him on. Okay. Whoops. What did I do? Sorry, I kind of put my computer to sleep. There we are. All right. So, you guys, I've got a topic today that I want to talk about, but I will also be happy to answer questions, open questions on anything. Of course, the more dollars you put on the question, the more likely it is the faster I answer it. But open Q&A today, pretty much. When I'm on the road, it's harder for me to kind of really prep shows and have clear topics. I'll also say that the news cycle is pretty weak. There's very little going on. I mean, what am I going to talk about? The stupid infrastructure bill that Republicans have capitulated on, and we're going to have more government spending, or what? The Iranian deal, or the state of Iran, or I mean, there's so much BS in the news. But I actually wanted to talk about something more, I don't know, big picture, I guess. Something that relates more to the state of Western civilization, maybe the state of the world more broadly, to kind of where we are in the West. And I've been listening. I've been listening to a book I've read, and this is kind of my second reading, but I'm actually enjoying it much more this time than I did even the first time, and that is the book The Cave in the Lake. It's a book I've recommended in the past, and I highly recommend. I think everybody should read it. I really am enjoying it. You can quibble about certain aspects of the historical analysis. You can quibble, I'm sure, as those of you philosophers out there can quibble about the particulars of the philosophical interpretation and the way different figures are described and their philosophies explained. But it is truly a beautiful book. It has this amazing scope. It basically takes on the entire history of Western civilization, and it tries to describe and explain the history of Western civilization through the perspective of the influence Plato and Aristotle had on shaping the historical events that have happened, that have occurred from the time of the Greeks to the present time. And it's truly fascinating. It really is interesting. If you look at all the different figures, if you look at the cultural movements, if you look at the historical significant events over the last 2,500 years, how much these two philosophers, these two philosophies, and the people who interpret them, that is, it's not that it's Aristotle that's shaping things, it's Aristotle shaping things through the interpretation of various students over the centuries, and many of those students misinterpret. You know, one of the fascinating things that come out of the book, and I think this is something that most of us know already, is the fact that post Thomas Aquinas, the way that Aristotle was understood, I mean, he became, for the Christians, he became an authority figure. And this is, of course, what religion does. Religion conditions you epistemologically to look for authority figures. This is why, you know, the evangelicals have, I think, are ultimately prone to support an authoritarian in the United States, because that's what religion does. Religion conditions you to look for authority, because religion is authority. It's all about authority. It's the authority of the book. It's authority of God. It's authority of the Pope. It's authority of the interpretation, right? So the way Aristotle was viewed through much of the Middle Ages, post Thomas Aquinas, and not because of Thomas Aquinas' fault, but the fault of his students and the fault of people who followed him, the scholastics, was that Aristotle was viewed as an authority, primarily in science, and everything he wrote scientifically was viewed as this is the truth. And when Galileo, for example, challenges some of the truths supposedly that Aristotle discovered, it turned out that most of what Aristotle wrote about science, qua actual science, was wrong. That, you know, he was wrong about science. He was right to a large extent about methodology, but he was wrong about the science itself. And when Galileo challenges that, not only is he challenging religion, right? Not only is he challenging the Old and New Testament, he's also challenging, and maybe even more importantly, according to the Cave in the Light at least, he's challenging Aristotelian dogma, the perspective of the Middle Ages of Aristotle as being omniscient, you know, all-knowing, never erring. Anyway, one of the things that really came out for me in the second reading, and listening really to The Cave in the Light, is the interplay between Aristotle and Plato, and how that interplay, the extent to which that interplay has really shaped civilization for the last 2,500 years. And it's never the case that you have the dominance of one over the other unequivocally, that it's never the case that Plato, I mean, maybe during the Dark Ages, there was a dominance of Plato's thinking, or Neoplaton thinking, and St. Augustine, who was clearly a Neoplatonist. But even then, there was some Aristotle, there was some aspects, there were cities, there were places where there was Venice, where there was other places where, you know, the more reason-based, rational, maybe even some egoistic commerce was happening. Certainly, it was happening in Arab civilization, but even in the West, there were thinkers. There were people studying. So the closest any one of these thinkers, either one of these thinkers, really came to dominate is maybe the Dark Ages under Plato. But for most of Western history, we've seen an interplay of both. Aristotle represents individualism. Aristotle represents political freedom. Aristotle represents science. He represents reason and logic. Plato represents primarily mysticism and the negation of individualism. Represents authoritarianism and kind of a longing for another dimension, another world. Maybe the most important thing is the idea of authority in knowledge, even more so than authority of, political authority, and more damagingly so, the authority of knowledge. But even then, like Newton, while Aristotelian in much of his methodology and his focus on reality, is also very influenced by Plato and very influenced by the idea of kind of the world of forms and the idea of, that Plato had about geometry and there's this constant, and of course Newton, at least according to everything so far that I've read about him, and I'm not an expert, had a real mystical side to it. At the same time as he was maybe the greatest scientist ever in terms of just the achievements that he achieved as an individual and how he moved science forward. So you get in different personalities, in different people, and certainly in different eras and in different cultures, this mixture of Plato and Aristotle, and a constant battle between them, a constant battle between this mystical element and this element grounded in reality, in reason, and in individualism. And it made me think about the world in which we live today. A world which is so frustrating, so mixed, so confused, so Aristotelian in some aspects of it, and so Platonic in others. It made me think of all these people I debate, but not in the context of my debate, right? Not in the context of just my debating them, but just all these people who believe things that seem so obviously false, that seem so obviously not true. All the socialists who crave for more socialism, all the statists of all kinds, left and right, who crave for more state, and or the people who decide that trade is bad, and it doesn't matter the evidence, the logic, the economic proofs, none of it matters. And it's unbelievably frustrating, and it's unbelievably challenging. Oh no, next time we'll get socialism right. No. In this circumstance, free trade doesn't work. It's only in that circumstance. Nottingham 2222, thank you. That's very generous of you. Really appreciate it. It's only in some circumstances, not other circumstances. The inability to think about this world, about the facts, about reality, about science, about logic, and it hit me while listening to Cave of Life. And I guess this is obvious, but it hit me, so I thought I would talk about it. That's Plato. Right? You see, if socialism is an ideal, if socialism is right, then the fact that we haven't been able to implement it in a pro-life kind of way in this world doesn't really mean anything. You can show a Platonist 1,000 examples, And they're going to go back to, but this is the ideal. This is what we need to strive for. This is, next time we'll get it right. And in the end, we might never get it right in this world, in this lame material world, this world of, this material world that we have here, which is just, it's not the important world, but there's an ideal, there's a, in another dimension. And just the fighting for that ideal, the moving towards that ideal, that is worthwhile. And if we could teach everybody to strive towards that ideal, if we can change people so that they can see that ideal, if we can show them the way out of the cave so that they can see the light that is that beautiful republic, Plato's Republic, or that beautiful form of socialism, then it'll happen. And maybe it'll take 100, not 40 failed attempts at communism. Maybe it'll take of socialism, maybe it'll take 100 attempts, maybe it'll take 1,000 attempts. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is we have to strive to that ideal. Success or fail. Succeed or fail. And you can point out to them over and over and over again. Look, it doesn't work. And it doesn't matter to them. And it's not even just an issue of morality. There's a sense in which it's an issue of epistemology. Reality, knowledge, truth in this world, the evidence of our senses doesn't count. It just doesn't count. I mean, the senses, we're told now by, neuroscientists, we're told now by, we've been told by philosophers, Immanuel Kant and Plato, the senses don't reveal the real reality. Our senses don't teach us what's really true. We can't learn, therefore, from experience. We can't learn from history. We can't learn from what's being tried or not tried. There's an ideal, and that's it. We have to strive towards that ideal, independent of experience, independent of what we see with our own eyes. I mean, I did a show with Greg Salmieri about this neuroscientist who's unbelievably popular, Hoffman, I think. Unbelievably popular. Who tells us that evolution has designed us not to see reality as it is. See, basically presents us with a scientific, quote, theory to justify Kant's philosophy or Plato's philosophy. So there's a sense in which once these philosophical ideas get ingrained, once these philosophical ideas a part of who people are, become, the ideas that shape them. You can point out, you can explain, you can give evidence, you can try to prove, and it's hopeless. And it's been hopeless for 2,000 years. Plato's influence does not wane. I mean, it wanes and ebbs and flows, but it doesn't go away. It wanes, but it doesn't go away. And it's truly amazing because, when I read Plato, Plato's explained, I mean, what he says doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with reality. But that's because that's our orientation, at least some of us. And our orientation is towards reality because, that's an achievement, but that's because we have adopted, for whatever reason, Aristotle's view of the world. So the real question is, and I don't have an answer, just a question. How do you combat this? How do you overthrow Plato? Because think about the Enlightenment, for example. So I just finished the chapter on the Enlightenment, or the chapter after the chapter on the Enlightenment, in The Cave in the Light. Highly recommended, Cave in the Light. And the Enlightenment is a fantastic period. It's a period in which, the idea of the rights of man, the idea of property rights, the idea of the benefits of commerce, the idea even that self-interest is okay, is good, that progress is generated from self-interest. Now, it doesn't go all the way, it doesn't have an ethic of self-interest, but it's so far into it. It's the age of science, the age of evidence, the age of logic. It's about observation, it's about empirical study, it's about learning from reality. It's the pinnacle of human civilization in many respects, of human knowledge. I mean, the Scottish Enlightenment, which reveres capitalism, or what was just being born as capitalism, the idea of trade, freedom, individualism, commerce, wealth, the positive aspects of wealth, the positive also wealth creation. The French Enlightenment, which rejects religion, and again, the pursuit of happiness that comes out of this period. I mean, it's just amazing. And they get so much right. So much right. And yet, in the midst of this, maybe, at least in France, but generally in Europe, maybe the most popular philosopher, thinker, is not an Enlightenment thinker, but it's Rousseau. And what's Rousseau doing? He's saying, no, none of this. This is all corrupting. This is all disastrous. This is all destructive. What we need is to return to the way things were before we were civilized. What we need is to reject commerce. We need to reject individualism. We need to be good citizens. We need to fight for the tribe, for the state, for the group. We need to be men, which means violent. Oh, well, I mean, in his terminology, when we were savages, before we were civilized, we were more peaceful than we are as civilized people. Whereas the Scottish are saying, the Enlightenment is saying, commerce brings peace. Rousseau says, commerce destroys human values. It makes us self-interested. It destroys the soul. And he's quoting out of Plato. At least he quotes a lot out of Plato. He's a Platonist. So in the midst of this Aristotelian enlightenment, in the midst of this recognition of so many truths, and in the midst of the beginnings of significant economic progress and the idea of economic progress, the idea of civilizational progress, the idea of the betterment of man, the guy who ultimately becomes more influential than anybody is the guy who undercuts us, who undermines it, who questions, who challenges, who rejects, and who longs for the barbarism of the past, and is convinced that only through the barbarism of the past can we connect to what is truly human, to what makes us truly great and truly successful as human beings. And that's what people gravitate toward. That defines, in the end, the French Revolution. And it's somebody in the chat saying it's emotionalism. Yes, I mean, it's emotionalism, but it's sophisticated emotionalism. It's emotionalism because since these world of forms doesn't exist, and these intrinsic values that are out there don't really exist, and the only way you can connect to them is through emotion. But it's stunning how much appeal this kind of rationalized emotionalism has in our world, in our culture, and in a sense, always. I travel around Israel, and Israel's an amazing country. It's truly an amazing country. I don't think people have a real appreciation for what Israel has done, particularly over the last 40 or so years. I mean, Israel's a tiny little country. The people who came here came with nothing. They didn't bring massive amounts of wealth. And, Israel was a poor country. It had nothing at the beginning. It was socialist for many years until really the end of the 1970s. In 1948, when it was established, it was run by people who were committed socialists. The labor union in those days was the largest employer in the country. And today, it's a developed country. It's booming. Every time I'm here, there are more and more buildings being built, and as fast as they build the buildings, they're not building enough. There's a massive shortage of particularly residential apartments and residential homes in Israel. Standard of living is relatively high. The quality of life is relatively high. It has a completely dysfunctional political class. But the Israeli has shifted away from socialism, more respect for private property, more respect for contracts, more respect for commercial freedom. And but it's not laissez-faire, it's not capitalist. But even that little bit of more respect has just generated this boom in Israel. And it's stunning, the amount of wealth that's being created here, the amount of prosperity that exists, the number of commercial buildings that are going up, skyscrapers that are being created, technology parks that are being built. And you can see in Israel, as you can see in America, as you can see everywhere in the West, this battle between Aristotle, which I associate with the tech industry, with advancements in technology, with ambition, with wealth creation, with prosperity, with individualism, with people as individuals really seeking out their own happiness, seeking out their own prosperity, seeking out the best for them. It's an amazing place in terms of production, in terms of creation, in terms of individual ambition and the individualism associated with that. And you see very religious people, involved in tech, making money in tech, succeeding in tech. And yet at the same time, Israel is statist, it's still got strong socialist elements, and it's obviously filled with mysticism of all types. I don't know why you're hearing an echo. It's an echoey room. It's a hotel room. It is what it is. I'm not going to play around with trying to make it better. It is a spooky cave voice because I'm in this room that is, it's got 3-story ceiling, high ceilings. I mean, really high ceilings. So you've got this battle between this Platonic mysticism and this Aristotelian realism, let's call it, reality focus. And it continues, and the mysticism is ingrained. It's ingrained, it was ingrained through Christianity, which is everywhere, and then it was ingrained in the secular world through the secular philosophers that basically, instead of embracing Aristotelian's secularism, embraced mysticism. And again, even somebody like Newton, who was obviously so focused on science and reality and logic and reason, and yet had this mystical element to it. He spent huge amounts of his time analyzing the Bible and writing extensive notes on the Bible, as if to discover some truths in there. I know I've got an echo. There's no way for me to, it is what it is. Ryan, the topic today is this Plato and Aristotle and the state of Western civilization. That's the topic. But on the Q&A, you can ask any questions you want. Don't forget to like the show, by the way, before you leave. I don't know what the likes are, but don't forget to click the like button, share button. But primarily like, and don't forget to support the show. You can support the show on youronbookshow.com/support, Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and you can through Super Chat right here. Right now, we usually raise about $400 in these shows. We're probably at about 100 right now, so there's a long way to go. So feel free to use this. Yeah, use your reason to ignore the echo. Focus on what I say, not on the sound of the words, if you can do that. Or think of the Platonic ideal of the words that I say and the sound that I create. So, we live in a world, as we have for the last 2,500 years, dominated by both Aristotle and Plato. A world split between the realism, the reason, the individualism of Aristotle, and the collectivism, and the fundamental mysticism of Plato. And you really, if you look around all the issues that we face, I think, those can be explained through looking at things that way. You can see Plato's influence on so much of the world out there, so much of the mysticism, on so much of the, both on the left and the right? The mysticism of religion, but also the mysticism of the socialist, the mysticism of the person who doesn't care about whether, about reality. Even in a sense, so all of that is Plato's influence everywhere, the collectivism, I think ultimately the tribalism. Aristotle is about you thinking for yourself, you having the capacity to think for yourself, you having a mind, you having the capacity to reason and to think and to come to your own conclusions. Aristotle is the anti-tribalist. His philosophy is the anti-tribalist philosophy. And as that fades, and you see that in places like the tech industry. I'm going to build a company and do something nobody's done before. I don't care what other people think. It's my idea. Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to show you logically that it's doable. You're going to hopefully provide me with capital to do it. But it's based on the idea of reason and logic and individualism. And I'm going to benefit from it. I'm going to make a lot of money at it. That's Aristotle. Suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I didn't change anything. So I don't know. Does that make any difference? I doubt it. One second. Does that make any difference? Anyway, I doubt that makes any difference. So, until we can, in some way, fundamentally challenge this Platonic view of the world, and I think the only way to do it, we've got now the philosophy that can do it, and that's Ayn Rand. Better than Aristotle in a sense, because she has the advantage of 2,000 years of knowing the consequences of Plato, knowing the flaws that are in Aristotle, knowing what can happen when we unleash human reason, what can happen when we leave people free. That now we have the philosophy, but what we need now is to get people when they're young. What we need now, it's all about education. It's all about the negation of this mysticism and this emotionalism, which is so prevalent in the world in which we live. I was reading an article, I think it's in the National Review of all places, not my favorite publication, about, it was funny because it was echoing an article that Ayn Rand wrote. It didn't give her credit for it, but it was echoing an article that Ayn Rand wrote. Ayn Rand wrote a famous essay, I think one of her most powerful, one of her best essays, in 1969, I think. Apollo versus Dionysus. Apollo representing, in a sense, you could view Apollo representing Aristotle, and Dionysus, in a sense, representing Plato. Apollo representing logic and individualism, and Dionysus representing emotionalism and collectivism. And it's interesting that this image of Dionysus goes through Rome and goes through the Middle Ages, and then you've got Apollo is clearly being Aristotelian, and she writes in 1969 about the Dionysians on the left, the new left, the hippies. She talks about Woodstock as symbolizes Dionysus, emotionalism, and Apollo, the Apollo program, Apollo getting to the moon, as representing Apollo, right? The Apollonian view. And that those are the two choices we have in the world. Do we go on the side of the Dionysians and what consequences that leads to, or do we go on the side of the Apollonians and on the side of science and logic and individualism, and what consequences that leads to? And it's a brilliant essay analyzing what's going on in the 1960s in the United States. And there's a article in the National Review about the Dionysians of the right today, about how the right has become Dionysian. The right has become, the way they interpret it, the right in the 1960s was about reason and logic. I mean, it wasn't really, but it was more so. It was about freedom and capitalism and individualism, and today, the right is completely emotionalist. The right is devoid of connection to reality. The right is anti-science and anti-technology. The right is anti-individualism. And this is the National Review writing about the new Dionysian right. And in that sense, it really appears that Plato now is taking over. He already has the left, and now he's clearly taking over the right. And that those of us who stand for Aristotle, stand for reason, stand for the Enlightenment, and I've talked a lot about the Enlightenment in the last few months, the last few years. Those who stand for the Enlightenment, we have no political home. And we're becoming a smaller and smaller minority across the board. Across the board. But, the funny thing is that this Dionysian element within the right was identified by Ayn Rand. It's inevitable, given their religiosity. If you look at evangelical religion, what is it but emotion above reason? If you look at the whole Trump movement and Trump, the Trump, the people who are willing to justify anything that he does, it's driven by emotion. It's not driven by reason, by logic, by explanation, We've got emotion, mysticism on left and right. And the place for reason, the place for logic, the place for Aristotle is shrinking. The place for the Enlightenment is shrinking. And if you look at a place like Israel, ultimately that will determine whether Israel survives or not. Does it go further along the path of emotionalism, selling out, of compromise, of control, of authoritarianism? Or does it somehow find those Enlightenment values and embrace its success in technology? And Scott says, enough with both sides stuff. Stop listening, because that's what you're going to get from the Yaron Brook Show. You're going to get both sides stuff. I see it. You don't have to listen. You don't have to be here, right? But if you're here, That's what you're going to get. It's so obvious to me, and it's so clear to me. And listening to The Cave and the Light, Plato's influence on the right, particularly right now, is so clear and so obvious. And the disappearance of the Enlightenment values, the disappearance of the Founding Fathers, the fact that the new right is not the Founding Fathers' side, not on the Founding Fathers' side, has no conception of what the Founding Fathers stood for and what they represented, what their ideas were, and what they fought for. That's the reality. That's why things are so bad. That's what we're fighting against. An idea that all we're doing is fighting the left is just nuts. It's just not true. I mean, the left might be the biggest short-term threat, but long-term, it's not. Now, of course, Plato dominates the left. Dominates. But you see, this is where the element of Aristotle, this is what's interesting about that, even there. And this is where I've always said I don't think the left is sustainable. Reality always fights back. Most people are not interested. So most people are not interested in this mystical nonsense of critical race theory or just anarchy or just mayhem and destruction and reparations and guilt and all this stuff. People, they just don't buy it. And there's a good example now, in Portland. Right? I don't know if you're following the situation in Portland. But basically, the riots have basically stopped in Portland. It got boring. And most people didn't want it, didn't support it, weren't interested. They stayed silent because they didn't feel like they had any grounds. The left, the nuts had them all high ground. But at some point, the police got a little tougher. People are being prosecuted now. And these nuts went around Portland smashing windows, destroying businesses for weeks, months. And at some point, it didn't go anywhere. It didn't achieve anything. And they just stopped. They're gone. I mean, I read this article, actually quite a good article, about this woman who is now, business owners are suing the city of Portland for not protecting their property. I think it's great. They're suing them for a lot of money. They say police did nothing to prevent the looting, nothing to prevent the destruction. All the business that they've lost, they're blaming on the police and they're blaming on the city for not protecting them, which is absolutely right. Maybe 150 thugs managed to destroy to shut down the city, and the police did nothing. Nothing. So there's actually a real backlash in Portland. The city is, I know some of you live there. The city seems to be opening up again. Businesses are opening up. There's this lawsuit against the city. And, the nutcases, what are they going to achieve? What are they going to achieve? Can't go anywhere. It can't succeed. It can't achieve anything. It's stuck in another world. It's stuck in Rousseau. But Rousseau is a dead end. Plato is a dead end. Socialism is a dead end. CRT is a dead end. The left is a dead end. Now it's a dead end that will brought a lot of destruction on the way to being that dead end. And it has. Look at Portland. But they are truly nuts, destructive, nihilists, have no interest in reality. But the rest of the people do. Hey, best friend Hank, thanks. Really appreciate the support. Thank you. It's very generous. Scott asks the same question every single time, and it's like there's a barrier, maybe it's a platonic barrier, that prevents him from he doesn't want to understand what I say, or he doesn't agree, which is fine. But this is Scott's question. Portland is an example of left-wing craziness. Why don't we see more right-wing craziness in places like Oklahoma City if the right is the threat? Because the right's craziness is not going to manifest itself in burning down buildings, because burning down buildings doesn't get you political success. That's the right's craziness is manifest in they stole the vote. The right's craziness expresses itself in voting for Trump. The right's craziness will manifest itself ultimately in whoever, Josh Hawley or whoever turns out to be the guy who takes over in some kind of authoritarian government that doesn't have to burn down the streets of Portland because it controls the streets of Portland. I'm not worried about the hooligans. The hooligans can be dealt with. Hooligans can be managed. I mean, if the authorities in Portland cared, they would have shut down those riots in days, minutes, hours. Hooligans are easy to deal with. It's the intellectuals. It's the political movements. It's the philosophical movements that are difficult to deal with. No, you gave the example of Portland. In Portland, they are hooligans. The left is not just hooligans, but mostly the radical left are hooligans. They're nihilists. They want to smash stuff. They don't want to build anything. And you can't win the hearts and minds of people. You can't win long-term with nihilism. You can win with idealism. And who has greater ideals? I think it's the right, not the left. Yeah, they attack the courthouse. They're nihilists. They're going to destroy anything in their way, particularly places that represent authority. Of course they're going to attack the courthouse and the police stations and anything that represents authority, and businesses, because they hate capitalism, they hate freedom, they hate making money. But that's not a governing ideology. That's destructive. It's big blow up, lots of burning, lots of noise, lots of destruction, maybe a lot of deaths. But at the end of the day, that's not what wins. It's not what wins. You've got to find an integrating, winning ideology. And again, I fear that comes from a Platonic right, from a mystical, nationalist, collectivist, anti-capitalist right. And I can see that right being created, particularly among Catholic intellectuals in the United States and among politicians like Josh Hawley and Cotton and some others. Right? But I've said this a million times. Either I convince you or I don't convince you. And it seems like some of you I cannot convince. And that's, maybe I'm just not explaining it right. I'll keep trying. I'll keep trying. Anyway, I highly recommend The Cave and the Light. I think it's definitely worth reading. Again, you might not agree with everything. You might not agree with his interpretation of everything. But the fundamental idea of the influence of philosophy on history, the fundamental idea of the importance of fundamental ideas in history, and particularly the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, which deal, they're the two system builders of ancient world that have shaped all of Western civilization. He shows that, I think, so brilliantly and in such an interesting way. So it's a great read. It's a great read. All right, let's jump into some of these super chat questions. See what you guys are thinking. I don't know if that all added up to much, but again, I think finding Plato and Aristotle in the world around us is interesting. I don't place emotionalism on the right. You're so frigging biased when you're listening to me. Listen to what I actually say. I place emotionalism on the right and on the left. I place emotionalism on both sides. And I see that more today than ever before. And by the way, Ayn Rand placed emotionalism on both sides. Read what she wrote about, conservatism, an obituary for an idea. Emotionalism is today on both sides. Platonistic, detachment from reality, detachment from reason and logic, is strong on both sides. On both sides. All right, let's see. Let's see, Ryan, just this is irrelevant. A year ago, I asked which was worse, leftist public schools or religious private schools. You said pursue a good education, you can deal with religion after. Yeah, I mean, I think a religious private school is better than a leftist public school because I think religion is easier to deal with than the brainwashing they get in public schools. Absolutely. And by the way, that just shows, so he says, we just enrolled our boys in a private school, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, it just shows how objective I can be, if I say so myself. As much as I hate the right, I still think that if you're going to send your kids to any school, to one of those, if that's the only alternative, I would rather send them to a Catholic school where they get a decent education in some fields and where they're exposed to religion and deal with the religion. Although, again, hopefully there are even better options than those two. All right, let's see some of the higher priced, who put real money. All right, $20. Have you listened to New Discourses with James Lindsay? He doesn't provide much of a positive view, unfortunately, but I think he has an interesting perspective on world culture, especially as it relates to Hegel. Yeah, I mean, I liked much of what John Lindsay has written and done with regard to CRT and about with regard to world culture. I think he's right to connect it to Hegel. I think he could go further and connect it to Kant and to Plato, because I think Hegel is very much a Platonist. So I think that some of his philosophical analysis is right on. The connection to postmodernism and ultimately that's connection to Hegel. I'm not an expert on the philosophy and the philosophical connections, but absolutely, I think he is. I think he's gone a little off the deep end, like so many, in becoming obsessed with being anti-left and ignoring the reality. So I think it's blinded him. It's made him a little wacky when it comes to his political analysis. But I think his analysis of woke culture, his analysis of CRT, for the most part, has been, as far as I can tell, been right on. I have not read enough to be critical of him. What I've read has been good. Okay, Bree says, you have said that people have an obligation to take care of their children because they chose to have children. Could the logic be extended to conception? You chose to have unprotected sex. Does having a way out make it moral? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a way out, then there's nothing wrong with having unprotected sex. Now, the way out is not a pleasant way out. It's not an easy way out, although, for example, the morning after pill is pretty easy and pretty straightforward. But, the problem is that even if you use conception, if you use protection, it's not always perfect. Accidents happen, and look, I'm on the side of pleasure here. I'm on the side of sex, and you can be careful. You can do all the things. You could be moral in that sense. How many people really want to go through the hassle of an abortion, right? So it's better not to get into a position where you have to have an abortion. But it's great. It's great that you have that option, that you can abort if you need to. If you get pregnant, and you don't have to give up your sex life as a consequence, because sex is a real value. And accidents, as I said, happen. And even if you're very careful, they still happen. So the moral issue of abortion is not about you should have an out if you act irresponsibly in sex. It's about a woman's right to decide whether to have the child or not. It's to carry it to term. It's about whether the fetus has rights or not, and it doesn't. It's not an individuated human beings, and in the first trimester, it's just a clump of cells. It's a clump of cells with the potential to become a human being, but it's not a human being. I mean, this is exactly the kind of tribalistic, I'm reading something from the chat. So this is the kind of tribalistic mentality that people have. So because I don't line up with them, they have to categorize people left and right. They can't conceive of a category outside of left and right. Right? So if you're not on the right, if you're not pro-Trump, if you're not pro-the right, then you're a leftist. And if you're not quite a leftist today, then you must have been a leftist in your past. So the whole focus is, Iran must have been a leftist at some point. He comes from the left. He is of the left. It's just a whole way of thinking in those terms. The left and right are not that different. The left and right are not that different. It's not an issue of left and right. It's an issue of individualism, collectivism in politics, reason, mysticism, in epistemology, egoism, altruism, in morality. Is the right individualistic? Not anymore. Not anymore. The nationalist conservatives are not individualists. The evangelicals are not individualists. Trump is no individualist. Are they egoistic? No. They're all about sacrifice. Whether the sacrifice is from Christianity, whether the sacrifice is nationalistic. But they're all about sacrifice. They're all about placing your neighbor. Are they pro-reason? No. They're mystical. Their religion drives them in that direction. So the differences between me, I don't want to talk for you guys, between me and the right, and the difference between me and the left are the same. I'm an individualist to their collectivism. I'm an egoist to their altruism. I'm pro-reason to their mysticism. And the left's mysticism is socialism, the right's mysticism is religion, or, some form of Plato's world of forms. No, I'm all for building bridges on real values, on things that matter, on issues where we actually agree. So when we find things we agree on, we build a bridge. But you have to find things you agree on. Not be motivated by emotion, because he sounded good, or because I hate those guys more than I hate those guys, so I'm going to build a bridge because we both hate those guys. That is the way to destroy yourself. If you build the wrong bridges with the wrong people for the wrong causes, you will engage in self-destruction. I'd rather be alone. It's not like objectivism is going to take over politically anyway. It's not like I have political influence anyway. I'd rather tell the truth. I'd rather tell you the truth. You can then do whatever you want, but I'll tell you what I view as the truth. And I spent plenty of time with people I believe that are closer to us, classical liberals, certain types of libertarians. I just came back from Freedom Fest. But, What is the most ardent problem of the moment? I'm curious what you guys think the most ardent problem of the moment is. I don't think it's happening necessarily on one side. I thought for the last, pre this last election, I thought the most ardent problem of the moment was Donald Trump. I mean, I know a lot of you disagree with that. That's fine. But that's who I thought. So should I have aligned with the left to go after Donald Trump because I thought he was the bigger problem? I don't think the left is the biggest problem right now. I don't. They're a problem. But beware of allies. And if you ally with the people who are going to be even a bigger problem than the left once they get power. Yeah, I hate the left, but I also hate the right. I hate collectivism of both sorts. And I know it's hard for you. You guys don't want to make those differentiations. And we disagree, and that's fine that we disagree. But as I said, I think the left burns itself out. The left hits a brick wall. That brick wall is America. The American people will not buy into this left. I attack CRT constantly, and I support people who attack CRT. I'm willing to build bridges with people like McWhorter, who's not exactly on the right. McWhorter and I forget the economist. I'm willing to build bridges to them. But I'm not willing to build bridges to people who I think are going to destroy this country in the name of destroying the left. I'm not willing to build bridges to Charlie Cook, even though Charlie Cook's an Ayn Rand fan. Right? Not willing to build bridges to Charlie Cook because Charlie Cook today represents real danger on the right. So James Lindsay, willing to build bridges with him on CRT. But CRT is going to hit a brick wall. I've said this 1,000 times. The American people are not going to buy into the idea that they are guilty because of the color of their skin. It's just not going to go anywhere. Not on a massive scale. And the contrary, the bigger CRT becomes, the more Republicans will win in 2022. The more the Democrats push CRT, the more the Republicans will win. The more AOC is the figure that represents the left, the more the Republicans will win. I'm seeing lots of people endorse the right wholesale in the name of fighting the left. All right, let's see. Ryan asks, I'm thinking about the correlation between the size of state government and the average level of self-esteem in the culture. You can't measure self-esteem. I'm concerned about the future state of my child's mind and happiness. I think that the bigger the government, the lower the self-esteem. The bigger the welfare state, the lower the self-esteem. The more regulations there are, the lower the self-esteem. The more control, the more the idea is you can't be trusted to run your own life. Somebody else needs to run it for you, the lower the self-esteem. The more the state intervenes and manages and controls, the more we approach Plato's Republic in the sense that the authorities on top tell you how to live and what to feel and what not to live, the more that happens. The more that happens. The lower the self-esteem, because self-esteem comes from individual values, individual value attainment, individual value identification, striving towards an attainment of those values. That goes away as we hand control over our lives and we hand control over our values, defining our values, achieving those values to the state or to any other authority. Self-esteem goes out the window. So absolutely, and therefore happiness goes out the window, because without self-esteem there is no happiness. People don't love AOC. Some people love AOC, but it's a minority. It's a minority.
Daniel says, I agree with your analysis of DIM. However, I'm not sure if the U.S. has the self-esteem to manifest its misintegration into nationalism. I think it may manifest in some leftist ideology, environmentalism, etc. What do you say? Well, I've said before, I think it's going to be a combination, because a true new integration, right, misintegration, and true new governing ideology, a true new ideology has to unite people from both left and right. This country is too divided for the new ideology to be what you would call purely on the left, right? Purely on the left. So, purely on the right. So what is going to happen is a fusionism of certain ideas on the right and certain ideas of the left, and they're going to have to be fused. And you have to think about what ideas on the right could appeal to leftists, and what ideas on the left could appeal to people on the right. And I think that there are a few of these. I think that at the core of any new integration will have to be religion. Religion is big in the United States. I mean, the left might not be formally religious in terms of going to church, but it's mystical. So religion, nationalism, which appeals to so many people on the right, but also appeals to a lot of people on the left if you structure it right. And then combine that with environmentalism, which is very popular, for example, among young evangelicals. It's very popular by young people on the right, are very environmentalist focused. Again, this is the Dionysian element of the right. They're very focused on things like in the environment. So if you combine environmentalism, nationalism into kind of a new religious umbrella, that's where you get the new misintegration. And environmentalism will be part of it. I think you're right, because environmentalism is something that anybody can get behind if you couch it in the right terms and you present it not as the destruction of civilization, but you present it as saving civilization, right? As a way to save civilization. A lot of people on the right could buy into that. So I've long argued since 2009, that the thrust of the way we will get to authoritarianism is this combination of right and left around nationalism, environmentalism, and religion. And imagine, and you'd have to figure out how to deal with race under that kind of combination. I don't know how you deal with race in that combination, but somehow that has to be dealt with so you can attract the people on the left. All right, let's see. Ryan asks, what do you think of Charlie Cook's horrible rant against Simone Biles? He called her selfish and a sociopath for not competing and putting her health ahead of the USA in the Olympics. Great example of the bad on the right. Yeah, I mean, this is putting nationalism. I mean, you could make certain psychological arguments about, why did she give up? Why did she, I don't know what exactly happened to Simone Biles. And I don't want to come to any conclusions one way or the other. I think we'd have to know a lot more to make a judgment about her. I mean, there is a certain element of weakness in what she decided, but I don't know. If she was feeling vertigo, if she was unbalanced, if she couldn't, some gymnasts and some trampoline artists get this condition where they can't tell up and down, and it's very dangerous, very dangerous. Then it's a physical ailment. Maybe it causes mental, but it's a physical ailment, and she absolutely should have retreated from the gymnastics. If she was just under a lot of pressure and broke, she broke. But there's a certain, you can see a certain why there'd be a certain weakness. But to do it in the name of nationalism, which is what Charlie Cook is doing here, in the name of, she should have sucked it up for the US of A. No, she should have sucked it up so she could have gotten more gold medals, so she could have been officially, unequivocally, the greatest gymnast in all times. That's why she should have done it, for selfish reasons. But to position her taking care of herself as something bad, That's what Charlie Cook is doing. That's just disgusting. It's down. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's a shame because Charlie used to be very influenced by Ayn Rand. He read Atlas Shrugged when he was young. It had a profound impact on him. And you know, this is the deterioration of the right. Charlie Cook, if you'd asked me 5 years ago what I thought of Charlie Cook, I would have had a lot of positive things to say about him. And would have told you that I was quite optimistic about elements on the right because Charlie Cook was a good example of somebody entrepreneurial, very friendly towards Ayn Rand, very friendly towards laissez-faire capitalism, very, pro the right things and understanding of the founding fathers. And then you had Donald Trump, and it completely reshaped the map. And I've known Charlie Cook since he was a high school kid. I met him when he was in high school. I met him when he started Turning Points. I've met him many times over the years. If you listen to his old talks on capitalism, going back to 2015, 2016, he takes a lot of his examples and a lot of his arguments from my talks on capitalism. He clearly, he knew me, we talked, he listened to my talks, and he was completely corrupted, completely lost all his independent values, completely lost his affiliation with the Enlightenment once he embraced Donald Trump. And that's the kind of damage that Trump did. Now, it showed that he was weak to begin with, Charlie Cook, but Trump brought the worst out of people, out of these people who were within the conservative movement, within the right. And that's what's scary. She took a spot on the American team and then didn't compete, and somebody else filled the spot. It wasn't that there wasn't a spot, everybody competed. But she felt she couldn't compete. She made a first jump, and she felt bad. She couldn't go on. But no, you're supposed to suck it in for the country, for the state, because the country is more important than you as an individual. Whether you're healthy or not, whether you want to compete or not, is irrelevant because it's your country. It's not Trump that is not responsible. Of course, Charlie Cook is responsible. Trump brought this out in people in a way that's, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating sociological phenomenon. It's a fascinating phenomena that he tilted the entire political map. He changed the way people thought. I saw it within objectivism. I saw it within the right. I saw it among libertarians. I saw it across the board. Trump had this amazing influence on people. He's a stunning communicator, and there's something that he triggered that changed people. It changed people's attitudes towards a variety of different things, and it's a phenomenon that needs to be studied. It needs to be understood, but it exposed many people's weaknesses, and he had this ability. I don't have a good explanation for it. Let me see, where are we? All right, no more $20 questions, so we'll take some of the lower ones. Yaron, could you please give a quick update on Israel? Are you optimistic on how things are moving forward in Israel? Subway in Tel Aviv by the end of the year. I'm not, I'll believe the subway in Tel Aviv by the end of the year when it opens. I'll believe that it has an influence on traffic when it has an influence on traffic. I'm generally have been for the last 15 years quite optimistic and positive about Israel, particularly about the dynamism of the Israeli people, about the dynamism of the tech industry in Israel. As I think many of you know, there really isn't a left in Israel, not a traditional left, not a Marxist left. There's a few small political parties on the left, but from a foreign policy perspective, and even an economic perspective, almost all the political parties in Israel are in the center. They represent nothing. They don't stand for anything. They certainly are not left. There's no CRT really in Israel. There's no Marxism in Israel. Those are all marginalized views. But there's also no laissez-faire capitalism in Israel. There's also no individualistic force in Israel. There's just murkiness in the center. Murkiness in the center does not drift left because the reality of Palestinians trying to kill Israelis is such that it keeps Israelis grounded away from the left. The history of Israel with socialism keeps Israel away from moving more towards socialism. But it doesn't help move Israel towards more freedom. So Israel's stuck, and you can see this in its current government. Its current government is composed of a right-wing political parties that Naftali Bennett and others that are, pretty good on economics, pretty good on foreign policy, with a bunch of leftists. Even Islamists are part of this government. And it is, that kind of government can't get anything done, and it won't get anything done, and anything that does get done is suspect. But that is, in some ways, it allows Israel to have, maybe not political stability, but in a sense, it has stability in terms of life, because the government, there's no big new government projects, there's no big new government interventions, there's no big new government initiatives, let's see. So, generally, in the short run, I'm positive about Israel. The question is what happens in the long run, and I'm worried because I'm worried about how Israel deals with the Palestinians. I'm worried about what I think is a real decline in the quality of the Israeli military. I worry about the decline in morale in Israel around defending itself. So, I think it really is a Trump wanted to silence lots of people. God, where did you live over the last 5 years? He wanted to silence the Washington Post, so he threatened Amazon that he would go after Amazon. He wanted to silence opposition left and right, constantly, continuously. He wanted to silence CNN, so he threatened to prevent a deal, use antitrust to prevent AT&T buying, Time Warner. He constantly attacked the First Amendment. He couldn't do much about it. He didn't have the power to do it, but verbally, he constantly tried to silence people, wanted to silence people, wished he had the power to silence people. God, you guys, you weren't listening because you were so, he's attacking the left, this is cool, that you completely ignored what he actually stood for, what he actually said, what he actually did, what he actually represented. It's stunning. It's what was right there in front of you. And, because he was attacking the Washington Post, and you don't like the Washington Post, that's okay. Because he was attacking CNN, that's okay. All right. So I'm positive about Israel in the short run, worried about Israel in the long run. How are Platonists able to claim scientific high ground when denying reality? Well, they don't quite deny reality, and look, the Platonists have become more and more sophisticated. And I'm not a philosopher that's going to try to explain this, but the more you read about Newton, for example, and his obsession with geometry and kind of some sense of a world of form, so they combine a respect for reality and a view of some ideal outside of reality, and they find a way to combine the two. I mean, how do religionists? People who are super religious also can be really good scientists. I mean, they compartmentalize. They deal in these things in different parts of their lives, in different parts. But a lot of science was constrained by Plato because they try to fit in the scientific ideas into a construct that was I think both Copernicus and Kepler were hamstrung by their Platonism. At least that's my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but that, we'd have to ask a philosopher of science that kind of question, Andrew. I guess I don't know enough about the history of science, but again, I recommend I don't know that I can explain it that well, but I recommend The Cave in the Light because I think he does a good job in giving you a sense for that and how they dealt with that and how, scientists constantly combine elements of Plato with elements of Aristotle. There's very little pure Platonists any more than there's any pure Christians, right? They have to deal with reality because reality is what's here. And therefore, they are mixtures, they are combinations, they are both. And they compartmentalize. Different parts of their lives are guided, in a sense, by different philosophies. What a mess. That's the kind of life you don't want to live. Ari asks, what do you think about the claims by religious people that the Enlightenment was a result of millennia of Judeo-Christian tradition? I notice people on this side keep bringing up this argument. Yeah, I know. I mean, Ben Shapiro has a whole book about this. No, I mean, I think Christianity has very little to contribute to what was already being debated between Greek philosophers. I think that Christianity slowed down. Put it this way. Because Christianity is basically Neoplatonist, Christianity is basically a Platonic religion. It's Plato, a particular spin on Plato. What Christianity did was suppress a proper understanding and knowledge of Aristotle. And Aristotle, as I think the Enlightenment knew him, or as maybe we know him, it took thousands of years, hundreds of years for really a proper understanding. And even Thomas Aquinas, as pro-Aristotle as he was, and as better as he was than many of his contemporaries and many other people who dealt with Aristotle, still Christianity held him back from a proper full grasp of what Aristotle really was contributing here. And therefore, Christianity held the West back. I mean, without Christianity, who knows what happens? But there's a good chance that Aristotle rises from the ashes of Rome, and you get a much stronger, earlier Western civilization. I don't know what Christianity adds that does not exist in ancient Greece. And the same is true of Judaism at the end of the day. So what does the Judeo-Christian tradition actually add? What does it contribute to Western civilization that does not exist in Plato and Aristotle, in that combat, in that argument? Now, to the extent that Plato is going to win, Christianity is the way in which he won. Christianity is just a manifestation of a particular interpretation of Plato that is explicitly monotheistic. Right? But so the West is heavily influenced by Christianity. There's no question about that, right? Explicitly and implicitly. But that's to its detriment, not its positive. It's when the West moves away in the Renaissance with Michelangelo's David, and even his Pietà, which I think is not very Christian, is an interesting discussion that gave in the light about Michelangelo's Platonism, which is interesting because particularly if you view the arc in his life and you view what the David represents and then where he goes after the David, and certainly in the Sistine Chapel supposedly is very, very Platonist. But yeah, I mean, I just don't see the contribution above and beyond the fact that Christianity perpetuates Plato and then misinterprets Aristotle into the scholastic tradition and distorts him, brings it back into the West, but through a distorted view of him that actually hampered many thinkers in the, I'd say in the early scientific revolution, the early Enlightenment, who were suspicious of Aristotle because he was associated with the Enlightenment. And then if you read Martin Luther, oh my God, I mean, Martin Luther hates Aristotle. He despises Aristotle because of his virtues, because of his ethics. Martin Luther hates reality, hates happiness, he hates this world. He despises reality. He's the ultimate Platonist when it comes to religion. So it doesn't matter Catholic or Protestant. It's not good. There's no real value in Christianity for the West. The West is constantly fighting off Christianity in many respects in its secular form, in its form of modernized secular philosophy. Kant, Hegel, German Romantic School, which even Rousseau, which is basically Christianity secularized. Plato secularized. Gail writes, fear seems to drive people like fish into a massive school, each following other direction without any independent thought. I think that's right. And I think what dominates so many people, some on this chat, and certainly out there, is fear of the left. Not understanding, not combating the left, not arguing with the left, just fear of the left. I actually go up against leftists all the time, more than any of you. Almost on a weekly basis, I'm debating a leftist. I mean, all the time. Who debates leftists more than I do? I don't know anybody in the culture who debates leftists more than I do. And yet, I don't fear the left. It's not about fear. It's about understanding their ideas, understanding why they're wrong, and knowing that we have better ideas and finding ways to communicate those better ideas. And it's not about, out of panic and out of fear, align ourselves with people who are ultimately destructive in and of themselves, which I think is what so many are doing out of fear. They, as you said, they become tribal out of a sense of fear. And I saw that tribalism over and over and over again during the Trump years. It was and it continues. The tribalism that's the topic, by the way, of the discussion. Oh, panic is everywhere. Panic, you can see it with COVID, you can see it with the left, you can see it all over the place, this panic. The right is panicked about the left was panicked about the right. And panic is what drove people to be so tribal. And that's the topic, by the way, of a discussion in London on Saturday, is tribalism. And there's a new book on tribalism that we're going to be discussing at the event. God, Richard is such a jerk. Man. Something. All right. He made another, among the many insulting comments for no reason, just because he's a jerk on the chat. Have you heard of Peter Zihan? What do you think of his opinion on the decline of China in the close future? He seems to have some opinions as you on crypto also. I think I've seen some stuff of Peter's. I've talked about China many times. I do think, to a large extent, that the China is going to experience decline. It's got significant demographic problems. It's got significant problems of production. It's just, I don't know if you saw this, but last week they attacked more of their private enterprise companies, in this case, education companies. They basically nationalized education in where there was a lot of private education in China. It's being nationalized now. That doesn't bode well for the future. What they did to that company that went public in the United States, and then they announced all these new regulations on it, and which tanked its share price. What they did to Jack Ma, I think China is in decline and going to go into decline. It's not going to be a sharp decline. It's not going to be all at once, but it's going to be a slow, steady decline, because it's becoming more and more authoritarian. That's what happens to authoritarians. They can't innovate. They can't produce. They don't encourage independent thought. They control. They shut down. And I'm not afraid of China. Again, so many people are afraid of China. I'm not afraid of China because I think China is a decline. The only question is the United States in decline? Is who's going to decline faster? I think it's still going to be China, but we're going to give them a run for the money because we're in decline as well. But I definitely think at the end of the day that that China is not a threat, not a military threat, and is overall in decline. And it's the weakness of the West that is allowing China to do things like take over Hong Kong and threaten Taiwan. But that's our weakness more than it is their strength. Anybody who wants to ask a question, use the super chat. You can do it for $2 or $10 or $100 or $1,000, whatever you want in support of this show. But feel free to ask that way. If you just ask in the comments, I don't usually answer those. Sometimes people trigger me, and I respond to what they write. If you can't show real personal harm to people's group identity, you can't beat collectivists. How is being a white nationalist harmful to me personally? And now I have no answer. How is being a white nationalist? Who being a white nationalist? If you are a white nationalist, you are harmful to yourself because you are engaged in an irrationality, in a form of tribalism that is destructive to you as an individual. So you being a white nationalist is destructive to you. Other people being white nationalists is harmful to you to the extent that they succeed or achieve any kind of political success, any kind of political power. Right? And they're not a threat, they're not harmful to you right now, but if they ever gain any kind of power, they will be a threat to you, harmful to you. So it's the kind of people that you want to make sure that they never have power. Because as a tribalist, it's, they are if you belong to their tribe, then you have to buy into the determinist, irrational ideology. And if you don't buy into their tribe, then you are their enemy. And we know what white nationalists can do to their enemies. They have no qualms about destroying their enemies. So white nationalism, or any kind of nationalism, is a kind of nationalism where the nation or the skin color or anything is above the individual, is the essential value, is destructive to the individual. And it is harmful to you now in a sense that it is perverting the debate. It's perverting the discussion. You want to make sure that you're not associated with those people. So yeah, I think nationalism. People who advocate for nationalism, they need to define what they mean by it. If they love their country, they're patriots, because of its virtues, and because it protects individual rights, then that is the kind of nationalism, and they believe that their country should only protect their rights, should act in the self-interest of the citizens of that country, and the self-interest of the citizens of that country is about protecting their rights, then in that sense, nationalism is good. But that's not what people mean by nationalism. What people mean by nationalism, including people like Carl Benjamin, is the placement of the state above the individual. That you do things for the state even if it involves violating the rights of the individual. That the collective, whether they admit it or not, is more important than the individual. How do you convince someone they are harming themselves by being a part of a group identity? Well, because they're harming themselves by denying their own identity. Their own identities as an individual. That identity excludes a group that is based on non-fundamental characteristics, like skin color, even like nation. So, to the extent, what does it mean to them to identify as a member of a group? It means that they are now sharing certain views, sharing opinions, certain advocacy of that group, and yet those opinions, those views are harmful to them qua individual. So they are living a contradiction. They're accepting determinism and mindlessness in one aspect of their lives when they should be expressing their free will, their personal identity, their personal values in every aspect of their lives, and using their reason, qua individual, in every aspect of their life. Stephen says both left and right have, quote, good intentions, but what are the consequences? That's the real question. Well, I don't think both have good intentions, because you have to define what good is. They both strive towards good, but so did the Nazis, so did the communists. But that good is not good. And if they were willing to engage their reason, if they were willing to look, think, evaluate, they would know that. So they're evading, they're being immoral. And the good intentions are not good. So it's not about the consequences. It's about the intentions. Their intentions are not objectively good. They're arbitrarily good, subjectively good, mystically good. But that's what is destructive. Are there any countries more free than the United States? You know, I don't know. By what measure? By some measures, the United States is about as free as it gets. The differences between freedom in the United States and freedom in, I don't know, Europe is small. But, for example, free speech is still better protected in the United States than it is Europe. Europe has, for example, hate speech laws. The United States is not. But Europe regulates businesses less. The United States regulates businesses more. Europe taxes more. The United States taxes less. How do you balance all those things? Hard to tell. You know, in Portugal, you can take hard drugs. It's not illegal to use hard drugs. In the United States, it is. Do you care about that freedom? Does that matter in the big picture? Most countries, I'd say, in what we call the West, are very similar in the degree of freedoms they represent. Again, some have different cultures, like the United States has more of a culture of individualism and more of a culture of entrepreneurship than many countries in the many European countries, and that is that is the issue. All right. So it's very hard to say who's freer than whom among countries that are all mixed economies, that are all mixtures of freedom and lack of freedom. I don't know. I mean, is New Zealand freer? Well, look at what they did at COVID. I don't know. All right, let's see. John says, History of Philosophy of Atlanta Peacock course is free online at AOR campus. Yeah, I mean, the best presentation of the history of philosophy through Immanuel Kant, definitely worth reading while you're also reading The Cave and the Light. Also, that thesis that's in the Cave of the Life that Aristotle and Plato kind of shape all of Western civilization is in Opa. It's in the final chapter in Opa, kind of the theory of history, the objectivist theory of history, of ideas shaping, ideas shaping history. And so Leonard Peikoff, and of course in Dim, you see kind of the same analysis, it just focused on one aspect of their philosophy, which Peikoff says is the dominant aspect, or the aspect that matters the most in shaping civilization, and that is their attitude towards integration. And that every era has its own attitude towards integration that he categorizes as D, I, or M, and that shapes that culture. So highly, highly recommend History of Philosophy by Leonard Peikoff. It's free. How can you not take it when it's free? And of course, I would read Opa, Ominous Parallels, and Dim. Anything Leonard Peikoff has written is definitely worth reading. In addition, The Cave and the Light is good, but Leonard Peikoff is even better. How do you define a value for yourself? For example, values in psychology are very general, like humor or curiosity. Well, I mean, what you need to do is introspect what's important to you, but you also need to think about what's important to you. That is, think about what is going to lead you to a good life. And what you want is to find that place in which, there's overlap between the things that bring you joy, that bring you pleasure, that bring you satisfaction, and the things that you think are important. Because there might be certain things that bring you pleasure that are not good for you. And therefore you should reject them as values. And there might be things that are good for you that you don't get excited about, and you might want to think about why you don't get excited about them. That's part of the psychology. But what you want is to bring the two into unity, right? Ayn Rand has helped you a lot by identifying kind of the philosophical moral values all human beings should pursue: reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And then it's up to you to give that content, to provide content to these values. What does reason mean in my life? How do I implement it? What do I do about it? What kind of values will I pursue that manifest this idea of reason? And then the same with self-esteem, the same with purpose. And of course, then to bring it down to all the different values that you have: values in other people, values in love, values in, what kind of material goods you want to purchase. But they all have to be consistent with your long-term needs as a human being, your long-term ability to survive and to thrive in happiness, your philosophical knowledge about what that requires. They can't contradict reason. They can't contradict purpose. They can't contradict your self-esteem as values. So it's real work. Figuring out your values is real work. Is humor a value? Is curiosity a value? Definitely curiosity is a value. Why is curiosity a value? Well, think about how reason is a value. Reason requires curiosity. It requires wanting to look out into reality, wanting to learn, wanting to know, wanting to experience. Getting the evidence from which you can reason. You can't reason without knowledge of the world, and curiosity is the motivation to know the world. If you enjoy humor, then humor becomes a value to you. And it doesn't contradict anything. It doesn't distract from your other values, so it's good. Run with it. Let's see. Phil, the only political party in Scotland that's the nearest to objectivism versus the collectivists are Scot libertarians. Am I right to support them on principle against the more powerful opposition? Thank you for your insight. And the challenge there is that the Scot libertarians, and I've met them, and I like them. The guys, I did an interview for, I think, the Scottish Libertarian Party. Is their affiliation with anarchism? and affiliation with anarchists, which I think I think anarchism is collectivistic ultimately, is destructive, is not on our side. It's not on the side. I don't think anarchy is on the side of liberty. So to the extent that you can support them while separating yourself, right, or making it clear that you're not supporting anarchism, then go for it, but it's very hard. I think anarchism does a lot to discredit the liberty movement. It does a lot to discredit our goals. But, you know, again, I've met the Scott libertarians, they're good guys, and to the extent that you can support them while expressing your distaste of anarchy, go for it. But, and recognize that, you know, the Scott libertarians are not going to win. They're not going to attain political significance anytime soon. Andrew asks, the principle of individual rights is so powerful and clumsily understood that Dr. Fauci invokes it to pressure vaccines, or is he using it properly? No, he's not using it properly. I mean, he wants, there is a good big push to mandate vaccines in the name of rights, right? You know, your right to be safe. You don't have a right to force other people to, to do anything unless they're a clear threat to you, and they're not a clear threat to you unless they're carrying a virus that is truly harmful to you. No, rights are misused pretty much by everybody. Certainly by the right, by the left, by the non-right, non-left. Everybody misuses rights, and it's one of the great tragedies because the concept has lost all meaning among, because it's so misused. You have a right not to pay rent. You have a right not to be evicted. You have a right, to have a minimal income. You have a right to not to lose your job. You have there's no end to it. Now you have a right to have everybody around you vaccinated. Complete misuse of the term and a distortion of the term, and it's very harmful for our long-term ability to talk about rights and to talk about rights properly. It's a proper concept. It's a great concept, right? All right. What do you think of the space treaty? Is that viable or naive? Well, I think it's naive. Any treaty, how is it enforced? How will it be enforced? I'd like to see a space treaty that basically says that space is privatized, go for it, and that the United States will protect the property rights of anybody who goes into space and declares something private property. The United States will protect him, whether he's Chinese, Russian, whatever. Go for it. Space should be privatized. I'd like to see the complete privatization of space. Henrik asks, do you really think AOI's efforts are enough to change the current decline in the world? Their content completely lacks passion. No, I don't think their content lacks passion. Is it enough? No, we need a lot more. But I don't think passion is what's lacking. I think more is what's lacking. I think what AOI does needs to be scaled, on a massive level. I think they need to find ways to get their work out on a big scale, but they also need many, many more intellectuals, many more types of intellectuals, levels of intellectuals, different communicators at different forums, at different ways. So what we need is a lot more of what's being done and different stuff, but part of the passion, that maybe you see lacking will come if we can get more people and a greater variety of people and to be engaged with these ideas and to become intellectuals that are promoting these ideas. Right now, the pool is just too small. You need 1,000. I don't know how many we have today. Maybe we have 200. We need 1,000 active ones. Today we have 200, most of whom are not very active. I'd like to see 1,000 active intellectual voices. And that's when you start making a difference. And if you have 1,000, some of them will be passionate, some of you have different styles. Look at Sam Harris, how much influence he's had without being passionate. Thanks, Lee. I'll see if I can find your question. There's a question. Okay, Lee said, I enjoyed your 2016 Stockholm lecture about defending liberty, but was left a little confused. Quote, the 19th century industrialists deserve moral credit for what they did. They made all of our lives so much better. That's the quote. While proper to morally applaud the industrialists, perhaps for being rationally productive, isn't the talking of how they made our lives better in the same breath as their virtue itself buying into conventional morality? Isn't the good they brought humanity a side effort of their virtue, as opposed to the reason to grant it? I mean, that is a really good question. But no, because there is no conflict or contradiction here. What does it mean to be productive? What it means to be productive is to create value in the world, to make human life better. Now, you're making your life better. Your focus is on your enjoyment and producing in order to make yourself rich. But it can't just be that. It's part of your motivation is to make the world a better place. Whether it's in a little bit, in a sense that I want to make this product better. I want my customers to be better, but it's a genuine value. It's not I'm doing this for the sake of other people. You realize that the way you engage with other people is through trade. And the only way to benefit yourself, certainly in an economic sense, the only way to benefit yourself is to create values for other people and then trade, right? And gain the values that you seek. So there's no contradiction between self-interest and producing, quote, for others. Self-interest requires you to produce for others, because that's what division of labor entails. That's what maximizing your wealth and your ability to benefit from the material fruits that are out there requires. It requires establishing win-win relationships, maximizing those win-win relationships. And the focus is on win. And the only way I can win is if you win as well. See, the altruists want to present it as a zero-sum game. The altruists want to present it, it's me or you. And I think objectivism views it as me and you. We both win. It's not at each other's expense. On the contrary, I cannot win unless you win. Right? I cannot have an iPhone unless you create it and sell it to me. Right? And you can't benefit from making that iPhone unless I'm willing to pay for it. Unless I see the value in it. Now, in that sense, you're not creating the phone for me. But you're benefiting from the fact that I value the phone as well. So it's win-win. It's a trader relationship. Right? Stefan asks, have you watched the show Ted Lasso? Yeah, I talked about it on one of the shows. I really enjoyed Ted Lasso. I thought it was an amazing, positive, fun show. And it was very, very, so this is the thing about Ted Lasso. I was convinced that it would turn cynical, that it would ultimately be anti-Ted, that it would ultimately put him down, that it would ultimately be cynical about these ambitious goals and these big ideas. And no, it never turned cynical. It was fun. It didn't take itself too seriously, but it also didn't undermine itself. It didn't try to make him into this anti-hero. He's just a good guy. He's a little naive, but is very idealistic, and his ideals work. So I enjoyed the first season of Ted Lasso. I haven't seen the second season of Ted Lasso, and I recommend it. I thought that it, and there was another show about a young American in Paris, I thought were both very enjoyable shows. And the thing that really stood out about them was that they weren't cynical. So much of television is cynical. So much of modern culture is cynical. That cynicism is unbelievably destructive to today's culture. Richard, you continue to be full of it. All right. Did you hear? All right. Did you hear that his favorite novel in the last episode of Fountainhead? I heard that. Yeah, I love the American benevolence versus European malevolence in the show. Yes, and the same with Emily in Paris. I think the show is. It's about the American attitude. We can change anything. We can do anything. It's very positive. It's very benevolent. The Europeans know we have to do it the way we've always done it. We can't change. We can't do this. We can't do that. So yes, there's this huge contrast both in Lasso and in Emily in Paris. There's contrast between Americans and Europeans, and usually you'd expect it to come down on the European side. And what's quite shocking is that it doesn't. It actually comes down on the side of the Americans, and it avoids kind of the cynicism. Lee, I hope I answered the question in a satisfactory way. Ask me a follow-up if not, because it's an important question what you asked. Let's see. Brian Loves Humanity asked, the housing eviction moratorium was ended yesterday. Let me just remind you that this eviction moratorium that ended yesterday, that it ended under Biden, and Trump was the one who established the eviction moratorium, a statist moratorium if ever there was one, and the one who extended it. Right. What long-term effects do you think we might see from it, and will they properly be attributed to Trump? I don't think they will properly be attributed to Trump because so many people want to defend Trump no matter what. So it'll be forgotten. The right at least will forget that Trump was pro these eviction moratoriums. But the right is changing. The right is becoming pro-statism, with Trump leading the way towards the right becoming more statist, and the eviction moratorium was one little example of this statism on the right. The long-term effects are going to be profound. The long-term effects are, and this started under Obama, but it's accelerated now, no respect for contracts, no respect for long-term contracts. The state can come in and basically completely change the terms, freeze contracts, change the rules of the game. They're doing it en masse. They did it last year during COVID, but they did it even before that under Obama with the renegotiating the debt of the auto companies, which screwed so many of the bondholders. They did it. Under Trump, where he screwed certain manufacturers in favor of other manufacturers. The government is getting involved in more and more of these things. And the housing moratorium is going to reduce the incentive of landlords to build rental housing. It's going to create more of a housing shortage. But it more broadly represents the fact that contracts are not sacred anymore, that we do not have the rule of law in America. We have the rule of men. The politicians decide the rules. They can randomly go in any direction almost that they want, as long as they can make a good altruistic case for it. It doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't matter anymore. Wanda Friedman says, Hank Greenberg got screwed. Yes, Hank Greenberg got screwed along with a long line of financiers and businessmen who have been screwed over the years. But in terms of pure just ignoring contracts and getting rid of contracts, this moratorium might be unprecedented in American history. And it was established by Trump, not by anybody else. I don't understand why you call Nietzsche a nihilist, given that his rejection of Kant is very similar to Rand's. I call him a nihilist, and maybe he's not a nihilist technically, but Nietzsche's a bad guy, put it in less technical form. Nietzsche's a bad guy because he elevates the will and he elevates emotion above reason. He associates reason with, in a sense, the bourgeois, with the common people, with simple people, and he elevates you know, the emotion, you know, and that's what makes him a bad guy. That's what makes him ultimately destructive. Jennifer says it all comes back to Trump. It does come back to Trump in the sense that I think Trump is a real turning point in the history of this country, and I think Trump is a real turning point in the history of the right in this country. I think Trump represents the death of the right, the death of opposition to the left in this country, at least this version of the right, the version of that had any semblance of being pro-markets and respect for the rule of law and respect for contracts and respect for the founding fathers. I think Trump breaks that tradition, if you will. And it was inevitable. So if it wasn't Trump, it would have been somebody else. But Trump is a turning point. He really is. And you want to minimize his significance and importance in the history of America, you can do so. That's my view. My view is he's not just another bad president. There's something uniquely bad about him. And maybe it's not him. Maybe it's his voters. Maybe it's the people who supported him. Maybe it's the intellectuals around him. It doesn't really matter. But he represents a real shift in the right, away from any semblance, any connection to the founding fathers. Bush was a transitional figure. Trump capitalizes on what Bush did, but I don't think Bush is the transition. Bush is conventional. Trump is not conventional. He's not conventional. He clearly takes the right in a new direction. He clearly articulates a new argument for the right. And he shifts the right in a new direction in a big way. In a big way. No, I'm trying to have a proper assessment of Trump. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. That would be pretty shocking if everybody agreed with me. You are free to disagree with me. What I find pretty... there's a sense in which Obama was a turning point. I don't disagree, Ken, in a sense that Obama made Trump possible. I don't think Trump could have been possible without Obama. Certainly not in this cycle. But the right was ultimately heading in the direction of where Trump was. And Obama was part of what made that possible. Obama was the closest we got to an anti-American president. He was the closest we got to a egalitarian nihilist president. Wasn't quite egalitarian or nihilist, but he's the closest we got. And that, I think, pushed the right in the direction he was. And I agree. Obama was a real turning point. You can see that in the desperation, if you will, of the right to embrace Trump, and with the radicalization of the left. So yeah, Obama, Trump, together, they represent the turning point for both left and right. Both left and right. Biden is a nobody. All right. Yeah, but he's likely, if Trump is not the GOP candidate in 2024, which he very might well be, the question is who will be, and will it be somebody who is like Trump in the sense of the negative characteristics associated with Trump, or will the GOP move in a more positive direction, in a different direction, or take the positives that were Trump, the anti-regulation, the anti-leftist aspects, and build on that, or will it build on the negative parts? And I think that the Republican Party is building on the negative attributes of Trump, not on the positive attributes of Trump. That's what Trump did to it. And DeSantis is a good example of that. DeSantis, who I don't think will be the candidate in 2024. He doesn't have the charisma for it. But DeSantis' attack on free speech, DeSantis' attack on social media, is exactly building on the bad elements of Trump, and I think would be a disastrous to the extent that that is where the Republican Party goes. He was good maybe in COVID, but on other stuff he's been awful, just awful. So we will see. We will see. I don't think DeSantis is going to be the candidate, even if Trump doesn't win. I'm much more worried about, ultimately, I'm much more worried about, yes, Trump was terrible in COVID, but I'm much more worried about, what's his name, Hawley, Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton than I am about DeSantis. Yeah, I mean, I see all of you guys, criticizing the Iron Man Institute. I don't really think you know what you're talking about. I mean, I think there can be improvements. I don't think you get it, and I don't think you get how you change a culture or what it takes to change a culture or what the challenges are to change a culture. It's very easy to be sideline quarterbacks. I mean, and that's fine. Everybody is open to criticism. But I really think you really need to really think about what does cultural change require? What did the Enlightenment do? What did the Aristotelians do to change the world around them, and how did that happen? And until you understand what it really takes, I'm open to criticism. I just don't think you're thinking through how did the environmentalists succeed? How did CRT succeed? What did it take? Was it marketing? Is that what it was? What does it really take to change the culture? And I think that you think about other movements and you look at what other movements have done and how they've done it, I think you'll come to different conclusions. And there are plenty of things that ARI and I and others can be criticized of. But I think you need to think of it from the perspective of intellectual movements and how intellectual movements move ideas. It doesn't matter what people are denying or not denying explicitly. The fact is, ideas are important. Even the people who are denying ideas are using ideas to deny them. So your job is to bring ideas into the culture, and the question is, how do you do that, and what's the right way to do that? And I'm happy to see new ideas on how to do it, on how to expand those ideas. But what I'm seeing on the chat in terms of the ideas you guys are coming from are pretty lame. All right. And again, I think it has to start with a deep study of how ideas have actually changed the world. I encourage you to read The Cave in the Light, for example, and then try to extrapolate that on how did you apply that to objectivism, and what would it take to actually see objectivism change the world. And that would require you to shift away from, for example, from politics quite a bit. And only then, I think, can a proper critique of the Iron Man Institute happen. And there's plenty to criticize, I am sure. But, I'll give you, I'll tell you that a lot of thinking, presenting an idea to people who don't care is useless. True, so you have to find people who do care. There are plenty of ideas to people who can. You can see that all around you, but that's not the point. The point is that we spend a lot of time at the Iron Man Institute thinking through these issues, thinking through all these aspects. And if you think there's an easy way to do it, I'd love to hear it. I'm waiting for that idea that we'll just do it like that. Henrik, I don't think your solution is the right solution, and I've told you. Anyway, I'm not going to get into an argument with you live here. All right, guys. Thanks. It's 1 o'clock over here. It's 10 to 1 a.m. It's 1 a.m. in Israel. I will bid you good night, and I will. I have heard your solution. I bid you good night, and I will See you soon. Not sure exactly when the show will be, but I will see you soon. Bye, everybody. Yeah, where is the...